Hey, Course homies. Talking about A Course in Miracles. This is Paul. I thought I'd talk about yourself. What is a self? How do you get one? Are you going to lose it? Where did it come from? What is the ego? What is a separated self? What is the separate self? I had trouble understanding this for quite a while until I finally realized there's sort of a missing piece that isn't really spelled out easily. And it's to do with the contrast between how you seem to experience yourself now versus how you are in heaven and how you were before the separation. And without looking at what is like your natural state of being, it's a bit hard to understand what the Course means by a separate self and so on, because we find ourselves in bodies thinking that we're these small little isolated people, and we think entirely inside that context. We sort of read the whole Course from that viewpoint, as if this is who we are. And so if it says something like a separated self, people will tend to think, well, that means myself, this whole of this, whatever this is, that's the self that I made up, and I don't really have a self. And I'm just this one Son of God that is just a sort of a shared identity that everybody has. as if there is only that and no individuals. And then you start thinking, well, what part of me is going to stick around and wake up, and why am I even bothering trying to wake up if I'm going to lose myself? And there's all kinds of ego resistance. So the really helpful thing that I realized finally, that really puts things in the proper perspective, is that before the separation, you were bigger than this universe. You were an unlimited being who is everywhere all at once. You have omnipresence like God does, because he creates in his likeness. You're literally expansive and bigger than this world, bigger than this universe, unlimited and infinite in your being. You were everywhere. That's what it's like being in heaven, that you literally exist everywhere that is. You are one with all that is, and there's no limits on you. You're huge. And in that state, you coexisted with God. God is also everywhere. So therefore, for you to be everywhere with God, you have to sort of occupy the same space as him. So if you had like a container and you fill the container with God, the container's now full, and you'd think, well, where is there any room for a sun or a creation? And without having to make any room, God creates you by sharing his space with you, allowing that to now kind of be two wholes that overlap and share unity and space together, as if there's sort of like two entities that are now fused together, yet there's two of them sharing the same bucket in the same box. Both of them everywhere. That the Son and the Father are both sharing everything with each other, and so it's nothing to do with space-time. It's a state of communing with God, being fully one, immersed, deeply intimate, joined with, one with, two things in one place. And in that state you shared. Sharing is the key. And God also created other beings. All the children of God. The kingdom of God contains or includes all of his children and their creations. And that's a lot of stuff. And all this stuff is overlapping, is everywhere, is shared. Everyone has everything. Everyone accesses everything that's been created. So not only do you share creation with your brothers as other children of God, you even share yourself with them. So like you put yourself, you make yourself available, and others that God created are able to access you and share in what you are, and celebration of what you've been created, that you are a co-creator with them, and you are part of them in a sense. You're joined. You're here and they're here with you, and you're sort of fused together. So you're sharing yourself fully, openly, with no blocks, no holding back, just fully exposed, and everybody else is fully exposed. A lot of nakedness in heaven. And Jesus said, "Good joke." Very naked, bearing it all, bearing your soul. And so you share yourself with the whole of existence, and with all of the children, all the sons of God, and the creations, where the Course says that you and your brother are co-creators, and you both created your creations together. So all of the creations, everything is all shared. Everybody has access to everything. Now, what happened in the separation? Where does this idea of an ego or a separate self come from? So you basically went from this state of total sharing and oneness and communing, overlapping, where you're everywhere, and you thought, I as one of the many children of God who previously was fully equal with everyone, open to everyone, sharing with everyone, willing to let everyone access myself, being part of the whole, I now want to stop sharing with all these others. I now want to cut myself off from the communing and the sharing, and put up a wall that wasn't there before around my infinite self to fence me in and keep others out, to end the sharing, so that now I've sort of taken a piece of heaven and sectioned it off and tried to put a wall around it to defend it, to isolate it. And the part of mine that's inside that fence, you think that's you. You think it's all that you are, because you've separated yourself from the rest of heaven, because you're everywhere. So if you go and you split heaven and you say, this little piece here, there's something inside there and there's something outside there, the part that's outside originally was joined with the part that's inside. It was all everywhere oneself. But now you sectioned off this little piece. The big part of you that still is one with everything remains in heaven, and this little isolated piece of mind that's inside the walls, that part thinks of itself as separate from the rest of itself and the rest of heaven. So two things happened there with those walls. On the one hand, you shut out everyone else, everyone that was having access to you and sharing and being one with. You're shutting them out and saying, get out of here. This is my little space that's just for me. You're not allowed to be here. Stay outside. and then at the same time hiding inside those walls and saying, I'm the only thing that exists inside these walls. No one else is allowed in here. I'm not going to share this piece of myself with you. And so that creates a situation where inside the walls you experience as though it's only you there. There's only yourself, that God isn't allowed in there, the rest of the sonship isn't allowed in there, all of heaven isn't allowed in there, and you only think of it as being this one little piece is only mine. It's exclusive to me. It's isolated and fenced in. And it keeps all of the rest of the universe out. And that then becomes an experience of being alone, of where you're seeming to exist in a little space where you're the only one in the space. And that was the original idea, that you could be alone, that you could be without the shared experience, that you could be separate from God, that you could omit and reject and keep out all of the sonship, which was an attack on your own wholeness as well as the sonship and God. And so have this sort of experience now that what's here is only me. What's here, well, all that's left is my self, my soul, my peace of mind, and it doesn't contain or share with all of the other souls and minds and whatever's creations. And so it has been separated off, and it seems now to stand alone, to be a isolated, separated self, where originally you had this self previously in heaven. You were already a fully created being who is everywhere and shares with everyone else that's fully created, but now you've tried to sort of section yourself off privately to have a local self to where it's only you, others aren't allowed in, you're not sharing, and you've put up a prison wall around yourself, which seems to block awareness of your connection with everyone else, and it interferes with communication. And that was what the body is the symbol of this idea of this sin, this belief in separation, the device for separation that has come between you, who now seems to be inside the body, the wall of flesh that the Son of God puts around his mind to pretend that he's cut off from the universe, and then everything outside that seems huge, that really is the rest of yourself. That is the rest of creation. I don't mean this world really, but the rest of the fullness of your being that's everywhere. All of the rest of the everywhere has been shut out, and you just are seeming to be inside this little body, inside a little mind, separated off and absent of any other beings or brothers or creations or God within this little space, like you're having a little private experience that is isolated so much that you believe God is not here, God is not in me, my brothers are not joined with me, that now it's just me by myself. And so that is a self that wasn't separated, that was sharing with many other selves that existed before the separation, and has now become selfish and wants to be special and unique and different and not the same as the others, and to have something that they don't have, to own a portion of creation as if to say this is only mine and not yours, to disallow it to others, to not let God have it, you sort of stolen away a piece of yourself and try to claim ownership of it and authorship of it. Of course, says that you were in your right mind and you had peace until you sought special favor, and God didn't give it. The children of God were children of God, many children who were all sharing this communal experience before the separation, and then some of those children tried to be special, wanted to have a exclusive, private, possessive, selfish, artificially meaningful, special relationship itself, to have something that the others didn't have. That some of the children became selfish. Some of them wanted to have special favor from God, to have God say, I'm going to give you something that's just for you, and I'm not going to share it with the others. And God did not comply, because God has to stay sharing. But by that point, you had already believed in the desire for and the need for being special, and therefore took yourself, your soul, which was already existing and already everywhere, and took a piece of it and sectioned it off and put yourself in a state of imprisonment in a body. So the body symbolizes this whole idea of you being cut off from the rest of existence. That everything outside of you is really supposed to be joined with everything that's inside you. God, who you think is out there somewhere far away, is actually inside you. Holy Spirit is in your mind, because that's where God sort of forced there to be a representation of himself in your little space, so that you could never really be cut off from him by the body. And so you were a self that wasn't separate, but yet was one of many, who became separated by this prison wall. That is, the key thing is realizing that you went from this big sharing state to a much smaller littleness, isolated little sort of fenced-in experience, where you said, I don't want to share with all you anymore. I just want to have my own thing. I want to just be my own self by myself without sharing it with you, and I don't want you to be where I am. I want to be alone. And so then you have this little desert inside you that seems barren and empty and lifeless, where you're not allowing existence, heaven, creation to coexist with you in that space, making you feel cut off from everyone else and separate from all your brothers, and therefore sick, because that perception of this separation device coming between you was a wall between you and the rest of yourself, between you and your brothers, that you're keeping the rest of you out, and the rest of the sonship out, because they kind of are you in a sense, but not exclusively. And so now you have this split between, there's a bit of me here, there's a bit of me over there, and the body is making that split. It is the depiction and the symbol and the dream of that idea. The body is clearly a separation device, and therefore it doesn't exist. So now you find yourself in the body, isolated, separated off, having a presence in a space where the rest of the things that exist aren't allowed to share this space with you. Bodies are all separated out by space. Thinking that this is who you are, this sort of experience of me being alone by myself, inside a vehicle, in a body, trapped, imprisoned, separate from others. Everyone seems to be separate and different from myself. This is the separation idea. This is what has manifested as different bodies and people being in bodies and seeming to have bodies. And so if you don't allow your inner self to reconnect and join with the outside self or with your brothers, so that there is a restoring of communication. Remember, the ego uses the body to attack and to disrupt communication. It tries to kill the body so that it totally stops communication and breaks you off from the sonship. We need to relearn to allow God to be in us, to have God in our mind, to let the rest of the sonship share what's in here, and to bring what's in here out and to make it all one, so that the separation, the split in your mind is healed, so that you can be everywhere again and communing with the whole as a whole. And that means universe-sized, completely unlimited. The body cannot contain you who are love. God cannot enter a body, nor can you join him there, because it's the idea of being extremely small and cut off and limited. And it is an illusion of and a defense against your unity with the whole of existence, the rest of yourself. And so getting into this condition, we have become selves who were originally created by God, God who encompasses all being, nevertheless created separate beings who have everything individually and want to share it to increase their joy. God created all these souls, and now you've taken a piece of your mind and you've tried to separate it off from the community, the sharing. And the illusions that you're using to pretend that, to define the ways in which you're separate, the image of the body, your separate thoughts, your private world, whatever, is kind of a fortress that you're using this body of images to depict an idea of you being separate, false identity, and as a way for you to sort of anchor yourself into the separation idea. And these illusions and images kind of form a illusion of another identity. So now you've got this body that seems like a figure in a dream that you've made up, that now becomes the hero of the dream and seems to symbolize who you are. Jesus says the body is the symbol of who you think you are, and so you then identify with it, and then people look at it and think, oh look, there's Paul over there, look at his body go, look at him, not even seeing you because you're not your body. And so as your mind separates off and identifies with or as an illusion of separation, a separate self, it puts all these images around itself to sort of layer on top of you artificial redefinitions of who and what you are, to create a false identity identified with the body, to cover up your real self, which is everywhere. And so then you seem to have a second self. And Jesus says everyone came into the world and made a self for themselves, made an ego. That's what that means. It doesn't mean that you had an ego before you came, and it doesn't mean that yourself is the ego. You made a second self, a false identity, when you came into the dream. You made the body, and the ego, the egotism, the selfishness, this idea of being so withdrawn from sharing that you only want to have your own little kingdom, this little fenced-off me that you're not sharing with people, not extending. So now you're in a body. It's now that you're seeming to now be a piece of the mind stuck in a body. Your soul seems to be trapped in your body, and it's surrounded by artificial illusions of separation that try to prove that that's happening, that you believe in, using denial and accepting it into your mind, false perceptions. And now you believe that this is where you are, what you are, when in fact you're this unlimited being who shares everything with everyone else. It's unlimited. And so that means, as Jesus says, as you wake up, you expand your idea of yourself. When you were in having your soul in heaven, as God created you, you were being yourself. But you were also sharing yourself with everyone else. And then, in the separation, you were trying not to be yourself. You split yourself up, you attacked yourself, you denied yourself, you denied the rest of yourself, the rest of heaven, and the rest of the sonship, and now you were sort of repressing yourself. You put yourself into a state of unwillingness and imprisonment. And what you've now become then is not yourself. So you've gone from being yourself to not being yourself. So really you haven't really become a self. You've actually covered up yourself, and now you're trying to block yourself, and you're trying not to be yourself. And the more that you try not to be yourself, the more you will produce ego illusions of the presence of an artificial self that seems to be who you are not, because you're trying to be something you are not. And so you increase the seeming presence of the illusion of a secondary artificial self, that simultaneously, the more that you put into that ego self, and the more it seems to increase, the less it is existing, because you're being less of yourself, and as the ego increases, it also goes towards death. And death is the state in which you have finally seemingly managed to deny all of yourself so much that there's none of you left, and you don't have any life left, any will left, any mind, and you just die. And that symbolizes the end of the separation and the idea that you're no longer being a self at all, that you've ceased to exist, that you no longer have a self in death. It's the idea of the death of the Son of God, and it's not the idea of having a self, it's the idea of not having a self. And there's a lot of people that teach that when you wake up, you're going to lose yourself, you're not going to have a self. It is absolutely back to front. You have a self that's real in heaven as God created you. I am as God created me. And you've tried to become something else and deny who you are, pretend that you're an illusory body, small, cut-off piece of mind that entails so much attack that it kills you, seems to, the illusion of death, such that when you're in the ego, you are not being yourself. You are not really having a self. You're pretending to be an illusion of a self that you are not. And the illusion of the self that you're not is what ends when you wake up. It is this denial of yourself that is taken away. The resistance to the truth is taken away. The blocks to awareness, the body, the separation device disappears. And your sense of who am I expands back out to the size of the universe and oneness with everything that exists in reality, in heaven. That you regain yourself, you wake up to your real self, you return to your soul, you return to awareness of being as God created you in heaven, having a full self. So there's a nice line in the Course that says, the ego is the idea of selfishness, and the soul is the idea of self-fullness. So exactly as I explained, you went from self-fullness, being a full self that's everywhere. You tried to become selfish. You didn't want to share with your brothers. You wanted to cut yourself off and sort of leave the family, sever your relationships, cut the ties, and isolate yourself in a prison. To be selfish, so that you can say, this is only true of me. I am unique and special. That I'm only myself, absent of God and absent of my brothers, not one with them and not joined with them. Which is very isolating and separating and alone, and it's a very lonely, dark prison. Which is why when you come out into the light, you can see that you actually exist. You have a self that God gave you. You have an infinite, immortal spirit that God created you as, in truth, in reality, in heaven, that lives forever and is always a brother to the other children of God that God created. So you wake up to who you really are. You wake up to no longer being selfish, no longer having ownership, no longer having privacy or exclusive rights or denying others access. You now share absolutely everything of yourself with absolutely everyone. You're plugged back into the network. You're reconnected to the oneness. You return to the sonship. You become one again. You rejoin the rest of yourself that's Christ, that you forgot was you. Your little isolated little piece of mind that was broken off, thought it was this tiny self, when in fact it's all of Christ. You return to the sonship. You become whole again. You return to having a full self as God created you, unlimited being, one of the sons of God, joined with and sharing with every other son of God as the one son, the sonship, extending it, creating other beings, returning to awareness of your creations that are in your being. The end. Back home with God as your natural self, as God intended. Doing God's will, living forever, sharing communally with God, having communion with God, knowledge of heaven, being yourself, being free to be yourself rather than being imprisoned in a body, limited. The body is a limit. The body cannot stay, and the body cannot enter heaven. It's just, the body is the image of the thought and the idea and the belief that you are tiny and separate. Tiny little, tiny speck on the surface of a massive planet in a huge universe, insignificant, tiny little thing that is fighting against the whole entire infinity of existence. that it cannot possibly contain the universe inside a body, cannot possibly stay in a body, have a body, project a body, believe in a body, make a body, sustain a body, or maintain a body while having that huge of an expansive experience of what you are. This is why Jesus says that you cannot remain in this world with this knowledge. You cannot have that awakening, that awareness of all that you are, all that is heaven, in a body. You have to transcend all bodies, all walls, all limits, all prisons, and be everywhere. And you cannot do that in the body, because the body is a limitation around your mind. It shuts things out. It has to not only become transparent, it has to disappear and totally not exist, so that you can return to the awareness that you are as big as God. And you exist everywhere, you're omnipresent, and you are back home sharing everything everywhere all the time. That is your real self, and that's what you've come from, and that's why the withdrawing from sharing is the only thing that's happened in the separation. The ego is the idea of selfishness. You've tried to just take possession. You've tried to reject others. You've tried to make yourself special and go into a small isolated prison where you don't share anything with anyone else, where there's no love, no life, no extension. So you came from glory, says Jesus. You came from magnitude. You came from hugeness. You came from this magnificent, fucking massive self that still exists, that you took only a little piece of and fenced it in and pretended that no one else was in there with you, so that you could pretend that only you are there. This is me, this is myself, when all the rest of you is outside that and doesn't even believe that. So that's the separated self, that it's not a self you made up. You have a real self. It's just that you took a piece of yourself and you tried to cut it off from the rest of you and from the rest of heaven, and now you've surrounded it with a fake image that you're trying to pass off as who you are, a self that you made, an artificial, this is who I'm not, what is it like if I'm not myself person, that blocks yourself and makes you think that this is all that you are and this is all that exists, and I'm just this little person and stuck in a body with a little tiny mind that is only inside this body. That is a totally false premise for any kind of thinking, because it's an illusion. It's not the truth of you, that you're this tiny little body that is perceiving the huge world as a separate thing and having perceptions of it and putting perceptions on it. You are freaking massive. The world is your perception. The world is perception. The world is false perception. The entire planet and universe is the separation idea. You are freaking massive. You are unlimited. Unlimited everywhere. Bigger than the universe. So this is illusion of a tiny speck of mind pretending to be very, very small. You are magnificent, a magnificent being of light, God's son, one of God's children, a vital piece of the sonship, one with all other brothers and creations forever. So there you go. That's pretty much the backstory of how you, as this child of God, came to have a separate self or be a separated one. Jesus calls the separated ones, the souls who decided to believe in being separate and separated themselves that they had before, and now need to return to the sonship and not be separated and still retain their individuality and their souls. The Holy Spirit looks to what the children of God were before the separation and what they will be afterwards, because there will always be children of God, there will always be brothers. The kingdom of God includes all his children and their creations. There are many souls, many beings, and it's just magnificent and way beyond anything you can think of in space-time. So there you go. You have a real self. You're waking up to remembering who you are. You're uncovering the truth about you. You're exposing yourself to love, returning to communion with the whole of God and creation, sharing yourself, allowing yourself to be seen, to be visible, to be authentically who you are, true to yourself, true to the truth of you as an unlimited spirit being, not a body, stupid bodies, as God created you. You are still everywhere. Everywhere you want to be. There you go. See you next time. Bye-bye. Be yourself.